Hi, I'm Michael Ruby. Welcome to the Station Hill Intermedia Lab, where our goal is to create long-form works that bring together words, music, and video, and sometimes more. We couldn't do this without David Schell, our host here at Greenkill Gallery, a peer-to-peer artist space in the Hudson Valley in Kingston, New York. Tonight, we're going to see and hear Razzputin, with Sam Truitt on words reading his long poem, The Song of Razzputin, which was published in 2003 by Ugly Duckling. And with Greenkill's David Schell performing operations on Sergei Eisenstein's revolutionary film, October, mixed with the sounds of wind, fire, ice, water, and massaged black hole sound vibrations, and topped off with a rendition of Rano Rano, performed by a three-woman chorus from the central Dnieper region of Ukraine. Several years after Grigory Rasputin's body was fished from the Neva's icy edge on January 1st, 1917, the Russian artist Varvara Stepanova wrote something that applies to this and many performances here. She wrote, "In non-objective creation, you will not find anything familiar, anything comprehensible. But don't be put off by this. Grow fond of art. Understand what it is to live art. And don't just investigate it and analyze it. Don't just admire it casually. Don't just search for intelligible subjects in it or depictions of themes you like. Non-objective creation is still only the beginning of a great new epoch, of an unprecedented great creation, which is destined to open the doors to mysteries more profound than science and technology." Before we begin, Sam Truitt wanted me to read this brief statement. "We hope this rhythm we set in motion tonight will join the many others in the wave pattern that will bring an end to the iron clown and all forms of tyranny, so we can get on with the business of rescuing Earth from ourselves. Here's to a new October revolution in Russia."
The Song of Razzputin. 1. What began in confusion ended in a pencil-thin mustache. And 3 centuries have passed like a dream. St. Petersburg stands glittering and crass at the edge of a sea on a marsh, bristling with fleas in a matchbox, dancing in the gypsy quarter where R sleeps, dipping tonight to a dramatically low décolleté shaped with underwire cups, hands black from tilling the soil, boldly up the steps of the throne to share the power, the bed, and the Byzantine luxury of queens. Huge enterprises had come into being. An epidemic of suicides swept through the city, and the courts crowded with hysterics, listening, for everything was available. Vice was everywhere, sensualists and pessimists, an insane, tremendous, male vigor like an airplane, Nijinsky, the great male dancer, displayed to the world outside. But it is too terrible. I won't do it again. The particular charm of his person turned into a conviction, arriving a complete surprise by post afterward. Dark rumors gathered around him in the university town. In the place of the imperial standard floated R's undergarments, warm, wet. She offered me her perfect breast. How can it be we cannot tell the moon from the sun? There are these crows out in the field beside the fountain, turning orange in it. A woman wearing a white shift skips toward the garden to drown. Father, what is wound? Whose wound? Who wrote it? Drew the scroll from the honeycomb of the ether to plunge it into the void through which it shimmers, and the letters bled through like scads of jewels. 77 bottomless roses ditched in the sewer after the blast. The heist, who will break the beakers? When will these white clouds of nascence like lab coats crowd out the Bunsen burners? But these aren't just bottles, they're experiences like the ocean, with just enough blue in them to confuse them with the sky. The sky that is opening now, a typical story considering the vacillations and strange lack of communication between the upper portions of life unbridgeable, even by goodwill, or what entered through one door fell through, or we have icons, the Japanese shells, or tea interned in the Peter and Paul fortress soaked her mattress in paraffin, lit it and lay down beneath the moon, beneath the stars, the sod burning during the war in humid August as Moscow and trams were overturned and everyone was kung fu fighting. They were fast as lightning, incinerating herself like love extending continuous rays until the eternity of eternities receded onto a painted screen of camouflaged figures, or the folds of an umbrella on an overcast afternoon, tucked into a shoulder bag and left in the carriage. This page, this blank page, this England, a corked jug and shaggy head braced in a vice, mumbling scripture. The hope is that somehow he gets his mouth to the lip of the jug to tear the seal and jerk it, gulping up, to spare himself thereby the grief of coming to. Because across every page of the manuscript scrawled in magic gunk, exterminate the brutes. The water pounds the shore, the back of his head explodes. The projector switch gets thrown. Everything is spun inside or out. What will in, will out. What happens here makes the spout. At the center of the fountain, splash on the bare-breasted marble naiad, who configured with some dolphin is an aspect of the collective tug, yawning at our abdomen. Though poesy, sweet rhyme, remains necessarily, like politics, an oral fixation concerned with tracing a stain on the scrotum. Infringements of vice like lace at panty edge, mumbling scripture. For in this emotion, where these two sad seasons meet, I stand the blue ribbon of blood clots coiled around my feet, vigorous and vast, the brush, the dirt clouds, the steam. Dark rumors gathered around him in the university town. In place of the imperial standard floated ours undergarment, warm, wet. She offered me her perfect breast. How can it be we cannot tell the moon from the sun? There are these crows out in the field beside the fountain, turning orange in it. A woman wearing a white shift skips toward the garden to drown. Father, what is womb? Whose wound? Who wrote it? Drew the scroll from the honeycomb of the ether to plunge it into the void through which it shimmers. And the letters bled through like scads of jewels. 77 bottomless roses ditched in the sewer after the heist. Who will break the beakers? When will these white clouds of nascence like lab coats crowd out the Bunsen burners? But these aren't just bottles. They're experiences like the ocean, with just enough blue in them to confuse them with the sky if they were not so brilliant gold bricks from the garden of the atmosphere, now only slightly fractured by the dawn. Like a newly insane man standing, waiting for the train to pull out of the station, ever so cunningly, intentionally disheveled before the wall over which is written in block letters lit. But the Band-Aid isn't where it should be. The street signs all have been scrambled. Everything whips together and apart. We are not where we should be, and even if we were, we wouldn't recognize it as such. To necessarily draw ourselves up before the moment as one worth acknowledging in lack of system. There's system, even if it's a sewage one. In the form of a toilet, pose maelstrom, swirls at the core of our houses, squat as the satanic toad crouched at Eve's ear, as the veins in our ankles pop. We have learned to wear the road's resilient rubber. Our lives repeat themselves, replacing tired old riffs of, "I've watched them on their wolves," said Mother, with one night in bed as the prince's bride, and I will be content. though it's still the same copper wiring. All the summers of the 80s, the same dull Flatus, and we were reamed. All our kisses, frankly, were political and tasted of brine. There is a bird sitting in the water, floating. But it is not just the garments, but all the gestures that went with them that we mourn the passing of as much, even as what went into them, the passions. We have so much to do. We must catch the train. The fires lick around us. The city in the distance, the same, profane and perpendicular, and each a ruin in the making. Curves you don't just get from burning out. I too have worshipped at meeting the smoke of her breath on my face. She before the hunger, before the image rises, impossible to get a hold of and held, let go. We touch teeth together to remind ourselves of the skull under my cock, sculpting the void. It is still inside there where she who wears the skull necklace roams, the jewel nestled in her belly button. It, like our lives, is beguiling but unattainable, until we find in the baby's mouth the dentures lost on the way to Alamogordo, fused to your name tag. S died in LA of a heart attack in September. Flies get everywhere, and before you know it, the soup is cold and the lawn furniture broken up for kindling. What is it about those pale eyes that made one feel unleavened? And lived at the edge of the woods in a hut readers of Dostoevsky will recollect. In the visible world meant he was lost, as you must be to slip into the swollen river. The missing white horse, he said, had broken away to run through all the film clips of battle scenes you remembered growing up in the burbs in religious ecstasy before the invocations and hymns, the garbled commands, spit polish, or pig iron within any high culture grid. Perched in the pine's dusky branches, only the crows seemed happy, cawing over the kitchen garbage. Everything leaves us where we were, barebacked in the honeyed dew. The engines of hate roar around us. And this too bloomed dream-wise over the sleeping giant. For no man is a fantasy, though he grows in spurts, earthenware and substantive, to arrive on the stage of life, endowed with all he needs for its conduct. Licked by solid stripes, bands of consciousness, connective tissues, tools, but what is a man without a maze also to pattern his life to, and then thoroughly bewildered, find himself through plunge down any rat hole and find a vestige of the human mind. But where's that get us, you ask, fiddling with the tassels of your rabbit fur hat, standing in the center of a clearing, watching the rain, kaput, skewered, screwed anyway. Sometimes a horrible marionette would creep out, smoke its cigarette on the steps and then scurry back in forever. Fragments and fragrance, everything we ever were, composite, spectral, blown against the wall, then dusted. The excitement does not end here where the face starts. The chaos of this whom I am. Many the weed whackers, but few the lawn mowers. This too bloomed dream-wise, despite spreading its complex shade. The boats float upstream on that rose-colored water, sunlight reflecting on a wall off it also casts a pattern on the surface. And each flashing mackerel resting in these meshes, sounding infinitesimal, frisky movements, shuddered through branches of pink coral like Japanese screens that, as each was lifted away, would disclose another slightly lesser act of modesty, until the entire charming scene was revealed as one variegated flesh pot, the cubes in the ice trays, thick with the frost of 20 years, tasted of grand funk. Or between the iron and irons, the white table of figures. In columns you first step through onto the steps of the Winter Palace. It had snowed since dawn's wee pink clouds wrung out of the rag, the last blackness, which has become this white page the future got squeezed on, trudging past the centuries, the last footman snapping, coiling and uncoiling like a yo-yo, the string to which, unseen or held by human eye or hand, remained taut, nervous. You felt a power enter you, sending a current through it. Ours eyes cast forth two phosphorescent rays which, melting, shone great luminous circles that drew closer, then fell away. Don't oogle at it through a glass, shoot it. Or as N was being crowned, for example, the order of Saint Anne fell to the ground, an evil omen. The wine, man, give me more wine. For the heart and the soul is like the king in war. Though there is nothing in good higher than the delight I knew as a boy, pronouncing the words that flew with raised spears and standards, the stiff, multicolored pencils of oxygen from my hand across the periodic table. 2 Romes have fallen, a 4th there will not be. The onion domes lacked vigor, wrote one contemporary, hastily on a scrap of blotting paper as he rushed to make that last train that would never depart the station, its whistle wedged open as the stokers labored, red-faced before the open furnace, all to swell one god awful wail, like the top key of an aluminum piano fused into a whorl of scrap metal, the wind. It is still inside there, where she who wears the skull necklace is. She wouldn't go on without the soundtrack. We made small, mincing movements. Yet who ever yet has heard of an orchestra hired to play Mussorgsky at a murder? With that thing down there, there's no way we're getting anywhere near the bypass. The production floundered, the walls shot up. Driver, can we stop for a moment at one of those huts where the lights are? Lights! Those are wolves! And then it was as though we had never been at all. The film posters glued to the sides of the dreadnought peeled off. They too proved to be merely skins of a kind of destiny. The emotions from the first weren't right either, too shrill, wiry, tortured and crucified. He was placed in a coffin, but he rose from the dead and started to preach again. Once more, he was tortured, flayed alive and crucified and wrapped in a shroud, which promptly turned into a new book of regulations. Nature is a teacher of wisdom. Just as every tree teaches of springboards, flippers, the coastline of France, rapidly alternating modes of nervous exaltation and deep depression. She had a face like a dirty dress, said P. Is the universe then merely a series of tautologies? What is the organization of an orgasm? In the beginning, God created the spherical ballad. It is the first glory. It lay beneath the tongue. And because R slept, he saw without sight the braid of his backbone branch into a tree of life, which is without death or dimension, but dimples, where wasps build nests in the hollows of the face, the mind, the 12-sided figure, In the beginning was the endocrine system, and a woman in a white dress leaping into the cellar for some wine and broke into climbing under the floorboards to snag. They had bricked up the exits of a number of German wine shops which still contain large numbers of looters, dead drunk. At the end of the vat, claimed one observer, they will be found like brandy cherries, swallows of terror. People are dying like flies, said R, blown away like gossamer. Young, old, children, all the same, stupid ones, clever ones, all are stupid, honest men, thieves, all are thieves, or else they are mad. Russia, in fact, is a large lunatic asylum. If you visit an asylum on an open day, you may not realize you are in one. It looks normal enough, but all the inmates are mad. I want my life back, Father, infused with feeling that is a portion of color, feeling, swaths of the vibrational band, like the ribbons of the maypole. How bare it looked all winter, standing in the parade ground topped by snow. But maybe that was all because a theme could not be got hold of. Pride, conquest, envy, love, tumble like fishes through our grasp. You lean over the side of the life raft, churning the black waters, scrambling the reflections of your ravaged face. Better to just have left. Better to have just left that to fade. And was there a fish there in the first place? Better if there had not. I never really knew what a good armchair with a standing lamp set beside it could mean. Yet all about the arts, about people, about living, there also breathes a light that forms in those imaginable distances things require to be distinct, numbers, the crux of the things separate, constantly elaborating, throwing off a phosphorescence that is a vitality knit into the tissue of things. Felt the way blind people must, kindness, relying on it. The night is coming toward you, masses of air, mobility, clouds. But wouldn't it be swell if every line wove that wall of perfect pause, the way each throb at the heart of the universe recasts the rose, tossing off waves of praise, yellow pressed leaves, sap gunk, gods. And they do stagger along, their heads back laughing, their teeth ungleaming, stained with tobacco juice, bare-headed their hair too has grown long, and as they went, they sang some sort of song, waving their arms in iron shackles that hove into view the vermilion palaces, the sherbet-wet ponds. Love is all there is. It composes the leaves and the tissues of your hand. Buildings stored with love become real, they sang. There is a light inside them, windows cut into the shape of mandolins. One false note, and we knew the whole atrium would collapse. On hot days, I imposed a fast on myself and worked with laborers. I thought of our Savior, who also liked to walk near streams. Sure, we were attacked by wolves, the chief among these being philosophizing, but they did no harm. The cigarettes smoldered in the ashtray long after the saxophone had been put away and the wax paper refolded. And the wax paper refolded to be inserted into the silence. With the closets of the shoes of the princesses. Did you know that soon I will die in terrible pain? What can I do? There's going to be a revolution, and we are all going to hang. Who cares from which lamppost? But what can we do when not even the priests are married, and everyone is indifferent, lonely, or confused? Ergo, the intrigues, the reach after honors, the jostling for position, red tape, crosswinds, all to the detriment of the real work at hand. Passing out gas masks to the masses rising to the surface of the oil slick, like something that upside down you swallowed, but noticed only as you did so, suppressing thought in that elastic space between where your eyes close and you open them again. You are still reading, still clinging to the edge of the bar like a raft, and that to slam the book shut will not cut the dream off, but the reading was what you brought to the book. Worms the corpses house. That entire passage was a belch of nostalgia, a sphere in which you saw yourself for a moment, arc, a stain on the fragile membrane which, to hold intact, you must stop clouding the mirror so hard, or try to make no not sound like a snap judgment. I, like you, was not always loved. Structural drift. Less things fall from the sky than you would suspect. Never receive the mark of the beast. The mark will be a barcode, and the number will be 666. The cashless society soon will come into effect. Within their environment, the workers in their worker lives let fly with the grace that is abandoned. That is, A's bones are lying with those of her grandfather, like an idea shaped like a door which we must unlatch and push to get to the core of. There are no words in the wall of the children's lettered building blocks. Where the chest should be, there's a bulging mass of roses. When you lean over to sniff them, your face appears in the screen. Two, glean the bright shapes in the clouded glass of the marbles left out in the rain. Run your hand along this line. Is it not supple, yet hard, sprouting broad leaves in the vigorous dark? But quickly, in succession, the wet sands were heaped up to bolster the moat of the castle. The electricity of a hard palm against the inner walls of a torn abdomen. Can you smell the streetlights burning? But envision first how the sunrise, dropping anchor in your chest, sent the landing party ashore through the reef, the surf to drive with a heave, the prow up onto the deserted beach. What do you mean by free lunch? The cramps building softly in prose-like insistence. Within the excitation of a phrase hung in the face of the Imperium like spittle. Because you could see they were squeezing out toward the expressible. You let them out in starts, for before their words, their blobs, and after their words, their pain. And I too have heard, O Lord, the plumbing roar thy name. This too bloomed dreamwise over the sleeping giant. Thus I come to the broken sentences. This sounds like a love letter, but how tiresome it is without you. R was seen to flee from the house of T, pursued by two men. He leapt into a passing car, picking his nose, gesticulating, blind, drunk. He held and kissed P, passionately, stroking her cheek. She pivoted, lunged, drove a knife into his teeth. She used the net of his memory as a flower frog. A sound swept under the ceiling. When they exhumed the body, the face was black. Other voices cracked under the lamps. I had an emotion and went to the clinic. The graffiti all but obscuring the walls, adorned with our handprints. I awoke and felt horny, so I jerked my chain and a pellet dropped. I love Sunday mornings. You're in trouble because I'm psychotic and you're not, said A, twirling her green mustaches. I sit and watch the tots in the dirt box get filthy. From behind a tree, a man appeared, wearing a belt attached to an empty flag holder. But with the decline of the family as a reasonable unit of poetry, they were shot anyway with their children, leaving a pock-marked wall in a country house in Siberia. Twilight sprawling toward the question, who are we then? When all the birds break off the ends of their branches to have a go at the joust. Of course, we have our days, and that was that, and enough to go around at least once. But do you ever, my child, get the feeling in the end, even if the lights are on, we're strangely left out in the cold, wet, or acerbic, bereft, confused about which side of the major questions of our time we were on anyway, as the silence on the phone line opens a pool of cornflowers at our feet, into which we are not ready to plunge, O Lord, the word that will shatter our visage. But enough of this religious crap. Talk sense and have a drink as once more the hourglass was turned in the tower. A woman wearing a white shift skips toward the garden to drown. How can it be that we cannot tell the moon from the sun? The time capsule was sealed and buried under the steps of the water. This is you, helmeted, bearing a battered pig skin, as the loudspeakers bark, "Hey, Ivan, I'm telling you, drop it. Consider the geranium, its eyelids snapping with intelligence." Picking up where we left off, the portraits on the wall, they age as we age, in gusts, caught off guard, torn, that plunge us through decades, then pitch us against certain concrete moments, blazoned against the sky, distant but familiar, though sometimes oddly only a shape cut out against the tops of buildings. that define them, becoming for that time the confines of that pantomime, wherein we can say, oh yes, that pattern is a double pleat fringing a lacy undercut, a charming silhouette in lavish scalloped lace, with the shaping and smoothing up strain almost biblical in its simplicity. Or sometimes overnight I have heard a person's hair turn white, caught off guard, the color falling from there to the sound of an oak leaf stirring, then swirling through the air to land on an eddy of the river. Below that, spun some in that element, then soaked in wine, matted to a clump, will sink and decompose. Think of each leaf as the palm of a hand, and you will understand. Think of each leaf as the palm of a hand, and you will understand something of the nature of how who you lay down beside last night may not be who you woke up to this morning. But that's no surprise. Masks are ill-fitting, eyesight diminished, and there's an itch between the skin and latex, maybe between towns. As the cart lurched along, you thought to tear it off and drop it, let a wagon wheel roll over it, or fling it into the grass, or the ground of you is littered with bits of glass and memories, like the tops of walls in Mexican haciendas, the shards of bottles cemented into them. It is hard to see past ourselves until we lose ourselves, or you will only be free once you have made yourself captive to some supreme belief and then discarded that. What Baudelaire did with his visiting card, or P in his apotheosis, sentenced his sister to live in a convent where she spent her sum of days constructing a virtual wagon. It seems to be an image of the Virgin that hung in the sky, gesturing to him, with her hand plant the cross beside the point, and quickly walk away from there. Our conscience, that mass in the play about N, performed by smokestacks, where everyone is God. Every impulse divine, and in which men tickled women to exhaustion. Those who died were regarded as lucky. But who can differentiate joy from religion, from the short, jerky movements, the peg from the board, the seashore from the sand to whirl from rhythm? I now see what we call our normal state of being as like a certain stage of drowning. One man leans against a park bench, jerking his torso up preliminary to running. Another walks hunched as though in pain. He disappears into the night. The females are distinguished by the broadness of the hips, the area below, orderly, beautiful. The curtains flutter in the open upper windows. We stand slowly dissolving into the sound of one heart breaking into a storm cloud, the gray veins of which contain a frame of yourself larger than you could contain without its assistance, without the desire that is implicit in the expanse of it. Those big runs of sound that blast out and then you find them at your back, scraping at the barnacles, which when you last checked the back of your head, you saw lining the bottom of a flower bed. That evening, all of Moscow was lit. Just before being tucked in, T let me have one last look at it, the illuminations, the fireworks. I stood enthralled, as Napoleon also must have been 100 years before, when he gazed, probably from this same window, at Moscow burning. My heart stops. I am ready to break down. The music is overwhelming. I have been walking without realizing in a mist how we lived in a fairy tale. We weren't human at all at that moment, but hard, cold machines of terror. I heard two sounds. I thought an opera glass has dropped. S was standing, his face turned toward us, making the sign of the cross over his blood-stained tunic. He began to unbutton it, muttering, "We are superfluous." And every mouth of beer hall, he'd take no requital. The general in charge of the palace, where it happened, reported the sudden influx in the numbers wishing to urinate on the column. There was scarcely any illumination, though neither was there gloom, the blackness of former years. All over the statue swarmed the scrappy children who hung on the tail, sat on the serpent, smoked under the green horse's belly, the endless bleached rags. I don't know how it will end. They seem to be living, but every time he gets off the train, he goes straight to the baths with two ladies. I tell you, it takes time to put across the idea you want a man killed, if only to make sure before you declare yourself that your listener is sympathetic. Appearance is everything. As when I have heard a witch assumes the shape of an animal, there is always some defect, some anomaly, some disjunct wing or ladder or cavernous metaphysical structure, like an automobile gone off the road, sail through a joke shop window, swore the heavy paunched Muscovites. Nemesis visibly stalked the 23 years of the reign of the last of the Romanovs. He could see the mountains, everything, flames rising up. R, when will you return? Life is so dreary here without you. The real protagonist is the cigar, or the real protagonist is the crippled countess, her blackened hair tied back in a ball, on the back of her head in a wheelchair. 3 men stand around, wondering how to get her into the car. Pink rouge on her cheeks, her hand in her white linen lap, expressionless, turned her cold eyes. Roof with the moss growing on it. Utterance versus text. Former where meaning is out. Latter where in. But I would like to foreground this story with a little pornography. Though the flower does not talk and the sky is free, look in and see, formed in stippled patterns on my skin. I came in from the garbage when I heard the bell ring. My wife and I were talking about having kids. I have no imagination. Oh, touch, 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 touch. We hadn't seen each other in 14 years. Our lines get tangled in our hair and matted to hang on the saloon wall before breakfast. If the thoughts are each short and come close, packed enough, the clusters of words like grapes that hung in our faces somewhere out there, you will meet Tolstoy, the pilot, on the road. And there is only one picking its way through the waste, interspersed with settlements, shipboard buildings clustered around a hole in the ground. There, the way grows more tufted, the thoughts denser. The wolf in the snow blast lifts her cold muzzle, ears pulled back, waving a craft fetish. This dream's potent muscle. How can we have heart where there is no synapse? But psychology is the study of deceit, philosophy, failure. What happened next was a snap, perhaps, when considering the power of our form anear, closure marked by none other than that we are here once churning these black waters that moved us up the bank and on to open, out ahead where the foliage thickens into sap, names that have become tentative, fleeting, though sometimes a whisper can list into a groan. For a pilgrim is held by both hope and fear, but the voyage is victory, and we held up our forms to be reflected by the anxious, fleeting lights flickering at the edge of the known, wondering how to go on. For both ways were excellent. We had traveled all night, and almost it was as like as not as if a hand held us at that moment, our noses pressed against the glass to see whether the ruined tower would open again, or the other obscured in wisteria, hacked in places, but still sound, namely impenetrable. That tossle of green spray overflowing the dark, as the dawn a raw pink lake of light discharged its cargo. Our legs, cramped, were also hacked in places. But how tranquil it is to sit and wait and watch the inquisitive ants scatter over the graph paper that stretched for them, squared off in every direction, limitless as time also would be if we could see its vertical axis, beyond which each intervening dimension melds like the Plaian, the dragon's tail's jagged edges, the curtain sweeping in that every direction to gather them back into a heap. For it hasn't changed much, most, what we remain concerned about, or what we were promised. The glittering highlights on the pock-marked desktop amid the storm-tossed functions chomping in the unceasing eddies of light yellow leaves ideologies that have grown dim and non-athletic. They flicker like that bulb with a loose connection hung in our communal kitchen. But how a flicker can actually seem like a flash, though sometimes a clown's vast face blots out the screen before the red slippers and the pints before the nightmare, in that fragrant dream that ruled before the letter, in the shape of an upside down inverted 4 was invented to be inserted into the gadget. All evening we had been talking about our friend, everyone changes him in memory. In each, he is reborn. He is unique and multiple, nearby and distant, enmeshed in moments and immortal. It is the only way a human being sees through boundaries, said T, the eldest. She was serious and studious, clever and witty, and always had an English book tucked under her arm at the ready. R called one society woman a cow. Over those years, he became something of a dandy. It is still inside there where she who wears the skull necklace foams. Some worship the sky through a hole in the roof. Another faith worships a river or a particular tree down their thin throats. When satisfied, they wipe their hairy mouths on their sleeves and bit into appetizing yellow-green, salted appetizing yellow-green salted cucumbers, from which brine and colorless seeds sprouted profusely. I became a stone lashed to the front of a train. Chastity is the sin of pride, nor shall you wonder for long unless you are fortified with will and are deaf and a little dumb. By the end of the meal, moreover, it would become apparent that his beard also had its part to play. Forms emerge, then they return like children or small ground animals who are harder to deceive than politicians, who pissing into scarves knot them around their heads, are drunkenly refused, shouting, more dancing. A supercilious shudder ran through the silent town folk milling around the fountain. He lived in a dream world. We didn't want to die with sticks in our hands. We didn't want to die. But wasn't the purpose, the whole of it, to fashion a way through language back into a ham sandwich? Because it is words, talk, that glazed with rain, trust up on that December night beside the side entrance to Go Playland, the sidewalk, the piss leaking from the trousers, froze on, said S, feeling everything does beyond the sun. Many have fallen, others continue, coming, going, through it, this thing with our faces attached, clothed, exercising choice to whatever extent we can, discriminating between this set of flatware and that indigenous arboreal splendor. But what choice did we have in the first place? What choice to be here at all, cupping our genitals? Or are we, for that matter, hear much. Most of this brief light appears to be what the functions and persistence of our bodies, knit with neuroses, pressed against the glass, allied with our habits, pattern which, like the pleats in the sand the waves cast up on the beach, seem to lend lucidity to as we dream, keeping time to some notion that it will get better. But who wouldn't have traded that life to open a restaurant in Paris? The bullet that will kill me is already on its way, he said, his mouth chewing what he would or will or had said today, tomorrow, or yesterday, worried, and the rest, you bet you could see also his thoughts in cartoon captions whirling the space overhead. That is the matrix of thought, that is the word horde, but visible too as you enter the angel space. The validity we saw and sought to render in geometry, to work into avalanche. These structures are made of light. We are unwittingly, like the fish cruising the black, compressed waters of an oceanic trench, each dangling a wee lamp affixed to our foreheads. When that light is snuffed, we become that funny picture of them at the end, looking on. Hair, nails, teeth. The corpse should first be drowned, preferably in water, then plunged through a hole in the ice, then earth, then fire, then air. Exhume the cube of space. The air is trapped in bubbles beneath the earth's surface. If man is dust, those who walk the earth release it. Therefore, the traveler is displacement. So we move on. We must, drawn. Though a barking dog would have done as well, diverting our attention as the refugees spilled out of the back of the truck to slip behind the tree trunks from whence they emitted high-pitched, striking sounds, drawing the stillness on beyond the voices, clinging to the roots of the power plant, which, like the cheek-length scar of the duelist, sought to elicit out of the branched confusions a little flaxen light to wink out ahead, which a tree is, or a road sign. I tell you, he was a kind of fish, a sturgeon, or carp, or a kind of breadfruit. Some people's minds are small and round. Some people's minds are square, with tufts of hair growing there, like whiskers, sensitive to the passing clouds that sheathed that head. You are attached to it, this gold ball, which after being plunged into the wall, glint in the beam of the flashlight back at you to become where the holes are, the starlight overhead and freedom of feeling. In it we have not ever been. Its touch and shape strewn across the surface of our senses like rose petals on a hot metal griddle. You were lying inside it, beside her. She you first saw in her honey and pink shawl at the fair dancing among the drunken villagers, a whirl of steps gracefully jackknifing toward you out of a column of dust. Your breath rising from your face in white bristling puffs, a little braille of stuff in the middle of the night, covered up like a blue crab burrowed in the mud, with just your eyes and claws poking out, or like a thief, the steel against your cheek, crouched in an earthen trench, fingering a hem. The expanses of delirium and tradition coalesced in your large peasant brain with its waters and its powers, passing from solid to liquid to gaseous state across St. Petersburg, fallen across Petra and Kazan, deeply covering in its seal the nightscape, the hard and soft alike an arrow points. Our minds also, the first sound of the night in it, expanding as it draws together a black needle inserted in the flesh below the right ear and crumbled.